Testing 1, 2, testing. Ready to go? Okay, guys, it's time for us to begin. I welcome you to the Labor Day Bible class. We've got several that's missing. Some are, obviously, they're out, and others are, I don't know, MIAs. This is our last week, and all the handouts up here, get them today, or unfortunately they'll go in that notorious file 13, and you can get extra copies. And I have also merged all of these lessons into one PDF, and you're welcome. If you haven't received that, let me know, and I'll be glad to forward that to you. The PowerPoints are not on there, but the PowerPoint shows. But Johnny's going to be posting those on the Dalrata site, so you'll be able to, if you want the PowerPoint shows, you can do that. The PDF combines all the notes, even those we missed because I was chasing too many rabbits, and we've got the handouts in there as well. So you're welcome to get a copy of any of these, or ask me for a digital copy, the PDF, and you can forward it to whoever you want to. No, did not chase any rabbits in the note, so there's no rabbit holes to go down, as Alice would discover. Okay, let's open with prayer. Will you pray with me? Lord, thank you so much for the blessings you give us. Lord, thank you for this Lord's Day, the beautiful morning that we have. We're thankful for the assemblies that we have the freedom to choose to attend, and for the edification that we find in it. We're mindful of those that are on the highways over this holiday weekend, and pray that they will have safety in their travels and no problems. Be with us as we study through this final lesson. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, as we begin, this lesson is on murmuring. And as we think about that, here's the verses that came to my mind. The verse in Philippians 2 was automatic: do all things without complaining or argument. Philippians 2 is a marvelous chapter. And in that, Paul specifically highlights the danger of murmuring and complaining in a congregation. And in that chapter, he gives us not only the command not to murmur and not to complain, but he then illustrates that with the personalities that you read about in that chapter. But as you go on through that verse 14, he says, if you do this, you do not complain, you do not argue, you do not murmur, he said, you prove yourself. That's an interesting word, isn't it? You prove yourself. You're put to the test. And of course, the test is that of the temptations that the devil gives us. And so there is that constant temptation to murmur and to complain and argue and just be, forever in a tizzy over things that don't go your way. But he says, you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent children of God. So if you don't think murmuring and complaining is a significant thing, it really is. And he goes on in verse 14 and he says that you'll prove yourselves to be blameless, innocent children of God, above reproach. He says, in the midst of a crooked generation. See, there's two groups. You've got this group that's proven to be blameless and innocent children, and then this group that are identified as crooked and perverse. And then he says about this crooked, among whom you are seen as lights in the world, holding forth the word of life. Powerful message in that. And then we add Psalm 141. As I was reading through on the daily Bible reading, it just seemed that verse after verse would come out to illustrate this. And as I was working on this particular lesson, I was reading through the Psalms, and Psalms 141:3 says, set a guard, Lord, over my mouth, keep watch over the door of my lips. That's a prayer petition I think we all can make. Abraham Lincoln one time was campaigning, and he was challenged by the man that was making vague and noisy and ridiculous complaints. He offered no proof of his criticism. Have you ever noticed that? A critic always can tell you what's wrong. They can never tell you how to correct it. That's 100% true. But anyway, this heckler was going on, and Lincoln, he said, my good friend here reminds me of a steamboat that used to run on the river when I was a lad. It had a 4-foot boiler and a 7-foot whistle. Every time it whistled, it stopped running. Well, that's what the complainer does. You look at and we'll see this later on, but the complainer is occupied and busy in criticizing and complaining, and they're not working. I'll tell folks, I'll say, work your hands as much as you're working your mouth. Let's get some things done here. That's not always appreciated. But anyway, that's the truth of the matter. You cannot grumble and gripe and complain and do profitable work at the same time. That's just a basic fact. And here's another basic fact. You're leaving a legacy, as we've talked about all through these lessons. A legacy is going to survive your dying. After you die, what you have said is going to be remembered above everything else. I guarantee you, that's what you said. That's what they're going to remember. And they can remember it in a joking, jovial way, or they can remember it with a seething anger and hurt. So it's very, very important for us to remember that. And so my objective in living is to give my grandkids facts so that whenever I'm gone, they'll look back and they'll say, that old crazy Pop, do you remember when he did this or when he said that? And it doesn't matter. That's the legacy. I'd like to leave them a legacy of a smile and not of sorrow. But a legacy, one man inscribed in his wife's headstone this, and here's her legacy. Here lies my wife in earthly mold, who when she lived did naught but scold. Good friends, go softly in your walking, lest she should wake and rise talking. So what's our legacy going to be? Some people don't know when to shut up. They don't know when to stop talking. And they'll go on and on and on. Well, our problem in society is related to this. People just don't know how to control their speech. They are constantly talking. And so You try to calculate the wasted man hours, the cost factors involved in all this, the expended energy, and it's all consumed by complaining. You take the typical break rooms, and the conversation in those break rooms, 75%, and that's way conservative, will be that of complaining and grumbling and, why are we doing what we're doing? Well, think about the waste of time that we have whenever it comes to our talking. There's another legacy, and this is illustrated in Nehemiah 8, or 6 and verse 8. There's always a little group in whatever organization there is, they're always upset with practically everything, involved in nothing, and they are busily sowing discord. Now, whether you're in a business adventure, a social activity adventure, or even the church, this is going to prove true. There are those that are convinced in every organization that they have the right to feel as they do because their way is not getting done. And even if everything that is going on is going positive, they've got a list of gripes. And I've seen churches like that, where you'll have a church that is blowing and going, and the members are involved, and then here's this little group, and they have their lengthy list, and it has nothing to do with what's going on in the congregation. They're upset because everything's going good and they don't really have anything to gripe, so they've got to invent some negatives in their lives. In Nehemiah 6, there he is out building the wall, and these grumblers come to him and they give him this list of gripes. And he says this: "Nothing like these things that you are saying has been done. You are inventing them in your own mind." I've had cause to cite Nehemiah many, many times. These folks are inventing this. And as we continue thinking about this, look at the murmuring of evil that we see throughout history. The first thing that pops into my mind about murmurers is that of ancient Israel. Specifically, you look in Numbers, I've got 14 there, but you start really in Numbers chapter 11. And there you have Israel, Kadesh Barnea, and they have sent the 10 spies, or they're in the process of sending the 10 spies. And you know the story. These spies come back with this report, 10 extremely negative. Joshua and Caleb are very emphatic. God is able. God is going to help us. And so the result is ancient Israel grumbled and griped, and catastrophe fell upon them. Inspiration causes us in 1 Corinthians 10 to avoid this evil. In fact, in Numbers chapter 16, there was more grumbling and griping even after the spies' report was addressed. There you have Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. There they don't like the organization that's set up. And this passage speaks to those who do not like the organization of the New Testament church, where the elders are to be over, and everybody wants it to be a demonic democracy within the church. But what happened there in Numbers 16, God had enough. And he told Israel, he said, you better separate yourselves from these people. Separate yourself right now. And then we all know the penalty that happened. And that gives us the lesson today. From Israel, we understand inspiration telling us that we should not grumble as some of them did and were killed by the destroyers. Now, these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction. Have we learned? Have we separated from the murmurers? I don't think so. All right, look at the life of Christ. He is confronted with this evil attitude. John 6:41, it says the Jews were complaining. They were complaining about the teaching of Christ. Well, there's always complaints about teaching, about preaching, about following the Bible. And if people couldn't please Christ, why in the world do we think that we can please this same group of murmurers and complainers today? There's going to be a constant murmuring about the preaching and the teaching. Inspiration, as we've already seen, Philippians chapter 2, strictly prohibits the church from this. Do all things without complaining or arguments. Well, that's what inspiration tells us to do. The story is told, and some of you in your personal visits could probably validate this as well, just change the names. But a preacher was visiting a member of the church, and he sat down, and she began her litany of murmuring. Everything was going wrong. The neighborhood kids too loud. People at church never come to, have you ever heard that? Never come to visit me. My arthritis is worse. The weather is terrible, and on and on and on she went. One complaint after another, and finally she said, but you know, the amazing thing is I had a terrible headache, and now it's gone. And the preacher said, oh, no, it's not gone. I've got it. So, you see, there's the legacy. Are you going to leave them with a headache? You know, and what you're communicating and what you're saying. The scriptures are full of instructions prohibiting murmuring and complaining. And there's constant commands against murmuring. And the tragic narratives of the Bible, the history of the Bible, shows us don't grumble, don't complain, don't murmur. And we want to look at this real quick as we go through this. I'm going to try, Doug, not to jump down any rabbit holes. Let's describe the murmurer. First of all, the murmurer allows pride to control their lives. And really, I guess this is the taproot of all our problems, is pride. We've talked about those who can never say, I'm sorry. Their pride just won't let them. And how tragic that would be on the judgment day for them. But pride is terrible. Pride has the upper hand in their lives. It overrules humility, submission, and cooperation. And so they are controlled by this all-consuming pride. You got to do it my way. You do it my way. My way is the only way to do that. And whenever his way isn't followed, then you have murmuring that follows. Pride looks to our own interest. It disregards the concerns of others. It looks condescendingly upon those that are opposite to them. Well, they just don't know. They'll learn. The murmur begins in a congregation or begins in a work environment. A chronic complaining campaign. It's very subtle, and we'll see this when we talk about the whisperer. But it's very subtle. It's not, as the Bible teaches, it's all underhanded. And so pride and the arrogance of pride controls our lives. But a second thing, the Bible identifies the murmurer in very plain terms. Going back to pride, there was a note I had that I want to mention. Pride to me is illustrated so well in the raw recruits in the military. And I've seen it time after time after time. You have these young green, I was going to say boys, but we can't do that now. Young green people. but they come in. And if they get to the rank PFC, boy, they've really achieved. And I've never seen a PFC that doesn't know better than a 4-star. I mean, that's just the way they are. They can do better regulations. They can do better commands. They think everything that comes down from on high can be improved. Well, that silly, arrogant PFC is about to discover how much he really doesn't know. But a second description. There in Romans 1 is a very significant point. The grumbler is identified as a whisperer. And let's look at these Greek words. First of all, the murmurer itself is translated by some to be a secret grumbler. You see, murmuring is a very low tone level of communication. It's not loud. It's very low. And it's often done in secret. The murmurer is a Christian that engages in that secret campaign of constantly complaining about an issue or about a person. And the murmurer is identified in Romans 1 as the whisperer. And the whisperer, all through the Bible, is always a negative characteristic. There's nothing good about a whisperer. The behavior of the whisperer means that they do it quietly, and they do it, I'm going to tell you a secret, but don't tell anybody else. It's always, and look at what that does for my pride. I know something you don't, and so I'm going to share this with you, but you can't share it with anybody else. Well, we know how well that resolve goes. It goes immediately out the window. The whisperer, though, communicates quietly and spreads malicious gossip. It launches secret attacks on a person's character. I'll tell you this, but don't tell them. If you want to hush a whisperer, just say, well, I'm very concerned about what you said. I'm going to go and talk to them. I need you to go with me. And wham, that door is slammed really fast. And the whisperer probably will continue, but they won't continue talking to you, which is basically all that you can do about that. But they're actions that are not well received, they're disagreed, and so the use of the tongue in that way is offensive to God. I like what Titus 1 verses 10 through 11 says, and while it's addressed really to the elders, the principle applies to everyone, but especially to the elders. In Titus 1, he says, there are many rebellious people, empty talkers, deceivers, who must be silenced because they're upsetting whole families. Well, the foolish person says, we can stop the grumbling by listening. Let's just let them have their time, their moment to tell us. Well, that's not going to work. That won't work at all. One time in Arkansas, Jennifer and I were at this congregation, and there was upheaval going on, an eruption. And it was unique because there were two sides, and both sides wanted me to be the preacher. Usually there'll be two sides, and they all unite in saying, let's get the preacher. And that doesn't stop it. But this time is totally different, very unique, but still very troubling. Well, they decided, the elders decided against my counsel, let's just have a congregational meeting. And everybody can get up and they can express themselves. Doug, you know how that worked. Jennifer and I got up and walked out of that congregational meeting. It was horrible. Titus 1, 10 through 11 says that the empty talkers, the rebellious people, the deceivers must be silenced. In military command and control, the worst thing that can happen in that organizational structure is for that murmurer and that grumbler and that complainer to start sowing demoralizing respect. And pretty soon the strength of the fighting will is lost. The same thing applies to the Lord's army as well. And Titus says that these empty talkers, they must be silenced. Now, the word silenced is very picturesque. It literally means you put a muzzle on it. You stop up the mouth. You gag it. And that word is telling us There has to be immediate and definitive action so that this person's mouth is stopped and the words do not continue. You stop and discipline. And he's talking to the elders, remember, in Titus 1. You stop these people, you discipline these people, or else their cancer is going to infect the entire congregation, upsetting whole families, the Bible says. And that's the worst thing that I see in a congregation about grumblers and complainers. It's very careful that we need to note disagreement is not complaining. The Bible gives us, the pattern, the format to follow on disagreements, and there needs to be disagreements because there are areas where we are left to choose what is the best thing to do. Well, and so those disagreements can be expressed, but not to the point of divisive and factious goings-on that happens. When all is decided, the Christian is bound to support and encourage the decision, and to do otherwise is to be guilty of murmuring. All right, a third description here, and this goes to Psalm 78. I wish we had time to talk about Psalm 78. Here's another passage that really could take up an entire quarter study. You begin looking at Psalm, and we'll list more details, but you begin looking at Psalm 78, and the first thing that comes to your attention is how murmuring damned Israel in their activity. And so Psalm 78, as we look at it in these factors, here's what happens whenever murmuring and complaining and just the vicious talk is allowed to go on in a group, in a congregation, in the church, in work environment, in a military unit, whatever it is. This is what's going to happen. The Bible tells us this. First of all, the focus is no longer on unity. The focus is on division. Are you on my side? What do you think about this? Don't you think this is wrong? See, you're choosing sides. You're being told to choose sides. But another point, it goes back to pride. Murmuring forgets God and emphasizes self. The murmurer becomes obsessed. And this is a behavior that's really typical in congregational divisions. The murmurer becomes so obsessed, that's all they can think about. And so they come into the worship assembly, and all they can think about, they sit there and think about, well, there's brother so-and-so. And I've had people tell me that, literally. They said, every time I come, I said, you don't need to come. Well, yes, I do. I need to come. No, you don't. You better straighten up your attitude. You better read Matthew chapter 5 and see. But murmuring forgets God and emphasizes self. That obsession is there. And so all they can see is what is not right with them. And their true characters are described, really, listen to what Paul says to Timothy. And he's talking here about members of the church. He says, for people will be lovers of self, boastful, arrogant, slanderers, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, holding to a form of godliness. Now, that's very sobering to me. All right, another factor here from Psalm 78, it leads to unrest rather than peace within the congregation. Any possibility for peace and harmony thrown away. The complainer will be amenable to peace only if their way is followed. Now, I can validate that, and you can too, especially in congregations. They're not going to be satisfied unless their way is followed. and they'll mutter, and they'll gripe, and they'll grumble, and they'll carp, and they'll criticize. You better be watchful. Those are damnable sins that happens as a result of that. It leads to leads to division rather than peace. Remember again what Paul said, these things happened so that we would not grumble and were killed by the destroyer. 1 Corinthians 10, 6 through 10. Jude 16 is a very sobering point. He said, these, and again he's talking about members in the congregation, these are grumblers, finding fault, following after their own lust. See, there's pride. They're not willing to just meld into the congregation to be one. They want it their way, and only their way. Now, the dangers from this, there's the passage, 1 Corinthians 10. The dangers of murmuring. Number one, discouraging others so that they turn away from God. And you see this in Numbers, really 11 through 16. The Christian ought to be the most optimistic person in the world. We have faith in God. We have the Lord God Almighty, who is our Father in heaven. 1 Thessalonians 5:14, Paul says, we urge you, brothers and sisters, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with everyone. Now, that's fellowship. You know, if somebody asks me, well, what is Christian fellowship? I point them to 1 Thessalonians 5:14. Encourage, help, patient. That's the essence within the congregation. We need to demonstrate that. Another danger is that of becoming the one destroying peace and unity in the congregation. I don't think people understand this point as they murmur and grumble and gripe, as they bring their list of grievances, as they speak their demands as to what they think is going to happen. But it's a reality, and the devil has deluded them into, blindness when it comes to this point. Have you ever been in a meeting where criticism was a dominant attitude? Going back to that congregational meeting Jennifer and I got up and walked out of. It was a meeting called for criticism. I don't want that. I'm not going to be a part of that. I'm leaving. And God does not want His people to do that either. Those kinds of meetings, whenever you give the murmurer and the grumbler an audience, it just encourages them more and more to be ill-content and negative and discouraging. Again, Philippians 2 talks about how unity in the congregation is destroyed by the constant critical speech that goes on. The murmurer's tongue wagging sows strife, fuels discord, and commends ill will. Think about that. Is that what we want? Do we want to be known as somebody who sows strife? Somebody who fuels discord, encouraging others to join them in their rebellion? Do we really want to demonstrate ill will toward God? Well, these people have no biblical justification. And that's why they are an abomination to God. Proverbs 6:19 through 20. You probably know this. It says, there are 6 things that the Lord hates, yea, 7 that are what? An abomination to Him. And among those, he says, one who spreads strife. That's an abomination to God. You may think you're doing it for as some say, for the sake of the congregation. Well, wake up to reality. That is not the case. All right, another danger that we see is that the danger harms those that are actually doing the murmur. The chronic complainer is never happy. Never happy. Things never go their way. You can try all you want. You can wear yourself out. And you're still not going to make them happy. Because they have not accepted that happiness is their responsibility and their choice. And instead of looking at all the good that's going on, they only see what is offensive to them. And they sacrifice joy and harmony. Psalm 78:17 says, they still continued to sin against him, to rebel. The Lord heard and was full of wrath. His anger was mounted. That's the destiny that awaits for the murmurer. And again, go back to that sobering passage in Jude, verse 16. They are arrogant. They follow their own lust. The heart that harbors murmurings will suffer more than the vicious threats that they send out. An unhappy person, a murmurer is an unhappy person, and they are going to continue to be an unhappy person. You can't change enough to make them happy. You cannot manipulate the situations enough to make them happy. So, do what Numbers 16 says, separate. Don't let them poison the congregation. There are some pro-action things that we can do to avoid murmuring. And these are things that we've talked about before. And so, quickly review. Number one is guard your tongue. James says the tongue no man can tame, but God can. If you submit yourself to God and fully commit yourself, you avoid murmuring by developing humility. See, this goes to pride. There is another way to do things other than your way. It'll work. You know, things are going to work. They don't have to be your way for things to work. James 3 says this, there's wisdom from above. And he says, first is peace-loving, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy, good fruits, impartial, free of hypocrisy. You'll find the work environment, congregational atmosphere so much better if each member has the wisdom from above. And then we avoid murmuring by remembering we're obligated to live as Christ lived. Christ wants us to do all things without grumbling, complaining, or arguments, so that we prove yourself to be innocent and blameless children of God above reproach. All right, going to the title of our lesson, what's the medicine for the murmurers? What if I have that sin in my life? Well, again, Psalm 78 goes through this, and we don't have time to look at the verses that are listed here. But number one, be aware of your own pettiness. Some people never understand that. They think their way is the only way, and as they are so insistent on their way, they become obsessive, petty in their thinking. You've got to do it this way. Well, often there's no grounds for grumbling. Many ought to be complaining when they should be thankful. Many fail to look for the positives in the situation. They're focused only on the negative. And so that comes down to my choice. I've got to choose to change from a grumbling lifestyle into a positive lifestyle. Even in the worst circumstances, as we said, you can find good things. One lady heard a podcast, I guess you'd call it today, but the podcast was The Face with a Smile. And that touched her. And she resolved to change. And so the next morning, she, previously, she was so negative and whining and critical of the kids. Everything, the morning would start off in that way, and it only got worse. So the next day after The Face with a Smile, she heard that and her resolve. She gets up early, puts on nice clothes, prepares a good family breakfast. As each of the family members enter, she greets them with a beaming smile. Her husband comes in, and she smiles at him, and he says, oh, along with everything else, she's going to develop lockjaw. Well, we need to be careful, okay? Once we change, understand there's going to be some suspicion about that change. So we need to do that. We need to be thankful and acknowledge God's provisions. Complaining reveals unthankfulness, ingratitude for what God gives. If you're facing bad situations, look, because there'll be some good things in there that God has given you. Demonstrate your appreciation. So many grumblers and gripers, they throw themselves a pity party focused only upon me. But if the murmurers begin thinking and thanking others, then their whole attitude has changed. Do you remember the little truism that says, you can never give away a smile because it always is given right back to you? That's true. Unfortunately, it happens in grumbling and griping as well. Third, the last point here, be active. Complainers are usually uninvolved. They establish their gripes on no one asked them to be involved. And I've heard that, and you have too. But it's amazing, once the grumbler becomes involved, then the murmuring ceases. The busy person doesn't have time. It's kind of like our kids growing up. You know, they learn quickly to say, well, I'm bored. You know, okay, we can cure that real quick. And so, you know, they'd have friends over and they'd say, don't tell them you're bored. You know, that's all right. The grumbler and the griper is soon going to be cured of what they're doing. The first thing, somebody comes grumbling and look at their involvement. What are they doing? What part are they playing in regard to the church? And I really like this maneuver. They'll come and they'll say, well, at this congregation, we did this, and it was so effective. Well, that congregation is not the congregation where they are. You got different people, you got different talents, you got different. It's not going to work. God didn't give you one universal rule for behavior and activity. And so do not compare with another congregation. That fuels grumbling and griping, but it's totally unfair. So, where does your speech bring you? Well, we understand that murmuring is a sin. It's often unchecked. It's never repented of. It's a tool of Satan. It focuses inwardly, not outwardly. Murmuring is an awful. It's an awful sin. And God's not going to tolerate it. And He doesn't expect us. If you have folks tolerating the murmurers and the complainers, get ready. It'll destroy the congregation. It'll exalt themselves over God, and it provokes trouble instead of comfort. Those are the 3 points we just mentioned. All right, communication must be pleasing. We must speak from the heart, as we've been talking now for 13 weeks. The murmurer can never be pleasing to God. Critically apply the words of Psalm 15. Lord, who may reside in your tent? Who may settle on your holy hill? He who walks with integrity, practices righteousness, speaks truth in his heart. He does not slander with his tongue. You know, 2 questions really that only you can answer. Is your disposition such that it permits you to dwell on God's holy hill? And is it possible that you are blind to your murmuring? Remember the point in James 5 verse 8. Behold, the judge is standing right at the door. Let us be aware of that. God's mercy will overlook murmuring and complaining, but only for the briefest of times. And we see that that is the case in Psalm 78, 37, and 38. Make sure that we are committed to speak from the heart words that provoke love and good works. One time in St. Louis, I was leaving to hold a gospel meeting, working with the preacher at that time, Gerald Cowan, and his wife Nita came up to me and she said, "Okay, as you go, remember you're to provoke unto love and good works, and if you can't do that, just provoke them." Okay. Well, I've accomplished both, I think, whenever it comes. But here as we look at that passage in Proverbs, and then let us remind ourselves of Psalm 142 and verse 3. As I said, I've got a PDF binder of all the notes, including those that we did not cover. You are welcome to let me know, and I'll email you a copy of that. We have the handouts here. Get them, or they are gone. As I leave the room, I'll get them, and I'll walk out with them. Thank you all for being here, and I hope this class has helped you. Next week, we start the new quarter study.